Thank you very much, Jason. Jason does a great job of setting up really what I'm going to talk about here today. His presentation illustrates a huge problem that's facing all of rural America today, the fact that we have more people retiring than graduating from high school. So Jason pointed to the fact that we're projected to have less than 1% growth, but even at that level, we simply do not have enough people to fill the jobs that we're going to be having in the future. This is a problem that not only affects rural America, it's going to be affecting all of America over the next few years. So rural places like Appalachian Ohio are really leading the country in trying to find solutions to issues that will soon face the entire nation. At the same time this is going on, the scarcity of workforce is happening. The skill requirements of industries of all kinds are increasing. And that middle piece that we talk about is absolutely critical in the skill for skill requirements. We heard from Scott earlier that companies are finding the people at the top, finding the people at the bottom, not finding the people at the middle. We've also heard similar things from Eric. So those are real issues for us. The bottom line here is that the pipeline of new workers is insufficient to keep the bucket of workers in our workforce full with the number of workers that are leaking out of that bucket. And that's true for this foreseeable future. Demographics are pretty stark. You know who's coming into the workforce for the next 15 to 20 years because they were up there on that population pyramid. And when that group's smaller than the group that's moving to retirement, you have a huge problem. So how can we maintain and grow economic prosperity if we don't have enough workforce? Critical question and one we need to be asking ourselves, and I'll suggest two principles to really address this. The first principle is that we need to focus on the most important, most critical skilled positions first. So if you've got a limited pool of resources to help, put your resources in addressing the critical piece without which you can't prosper. Lesser skilled positions can be backfilled by a larger percentage of the workforce, but without those skilled workers in the essential positions, those less essential jobs won't exist. So for every one you move into one of those skilled positions, you open up 5 or 10 or 20 opportunities for people in lesser skilled positions. So we need to focus on those skilled positions first. And second, and this is a very big difference from the way we've always done business with workforce in America, is that we can't afford to just assume we can leave certain groups behind anymore. We can't really maintain our economy if we continue to write off potential workers who need more help, more training to contribute to our local economy. Otherwise, we simply won't have enough warm bodies to get the work done that we need to have done in order to sustain the economy. Addressing those principles will require us to think differently about our workforce programs, about how we do business in America. The resources in those American workforce programs have declined under every president since Gerald Ford, when you look at inflation-adjusted dollars. That's happened regardless of who's in the White House. That's happened regardless of who controls what House of Congress. There hasn't been the will, and part of that's been that providing services to an aging population has drained resources from our federal government. But the bottom line is we haven't had the will to make the investment in workers to keep our economy as strong as it can possibly be. That's really compounded by the fact that almost all of our current workforce programs focus on one of 3 audiences: the young people seeking post-secondary credentials to gain an employment skill, the public assistance recipients with a focus on finding the shortest path into employment regardless of the quality of that employment or the value of that job in a local economy, and displaced workers, those who've lost a job, to provide retraining so that they can qualify for a job in another industry. Unfortunately, most of those current strategies targeted at these groups are both high in cost and low in efficiency. They also largely ignore many of the most critical factors for successfully moving workers into jobs. So I'm going to suggest 3 alternative strategies here, 2 that are proven to work at lower overall public cost and with higher success rates, and a third that addresses a problem that prevents many workers from securing jobs for which they're well qualified. So the first strategy that I'm going to talk about is innovative, but it's proven, and it's a way of addressing skilled worker shortages through incumbent workforce trainer. By incumbent, I mean the people already working in industry. And it's a model that we're currently demonstrating here in Appalachian, Ohio with Make It in America funds that were provided through EDA-led national multi-agency competition. The program here we call Upskill, and it's part of our region's Make It in America grant. This piece of that grant is funded by $1.3 million in Department of Labor funds over a 3-year period. And it's targeted at incumbent worker training based on a Minnesota model. In Minnesota, that model helped double manufacturing employment in a rural region that didn't have much else going for it. So it's been very much proven to work. Upskill focuses on the next increment, the next thing that an employer has identified that they need in the way of a skill in their workforce that they don't currently have, that's a constraint for the company, that's holding back the company, that's holding back the workers in that company. We use our Jobs Ohio and our manufacturing extension staff to go out and identify these skill gaps in companies, help the companies identify what training is needed, help them identify who are the right workers they already have on board, who have maybe 90 or 95% of the skill set they need, but need that one additional skill to move up. The companies are expected to pay their workers for their time in training, and they're expected to pay half the cost of training the workers up to that next skill. We let them use the wages they're paying their workers as their half of the cost, and that's usually enough. And the net result is a program that very rapidly fills the skill gaps in the company. So you're filling that in a matter of weeks rather than 2 to 3 years that it often takes to take someone and retrain them for a new career or train them up cold from the starting place to fill that skill gap. There are some other advantages to the model. It improves retention versus pre-employment training by focusing on workers we already know work well in that company, work well in that field, work well in that technology. You don't have the attrition issue, which is so much of a problem with pre-employment training. Provides that employer with a much quicker path to obtaining a fully productive worker for the position because it capitalizes on the worker's previous experience within the company. When you bring somebody new into a manufacturing environment, it typically takes between 6 and 18 months for that person to become fully productive, even if they come in with a good set of skills, because they have to learn how that manufacturer does business and how those skills are that skill set is going to work in that new workplace. By taking people who are already in that workplace and moving them into the critical slot, it radically cuts the time for that position to become productive. And it's also much lower cost than pre-employment training. That's achieved by training for only the specific skills needed by the employer where that work will be performed. The cost savings of the Upskill model for incumbent worker training are profound. There were 11 Make It in America grants awarded across the nation. We were fortunate enough to get one. The other 10 all focus on pre-employment training. This is the only one focusing on incumbent workforce training. We will train more workers in our one grant than the other 10 combined. And we'll place virtually 100% of those workers, while the others will see somewhere between an 80 and 85% placement rate. When you net it all out, it costs 1/12 as much to supply a worker for a critical position with this model as it does with pre-employment training model. That makes it an excellent way to meet the first principle I cited earlier, ensuring that the most critical positions are filled first. You'll learn more about Upskill if you stay around here for the afternoon breakout sessions where we'll be discussing that and our whole Make It in America initiative. Or if you're attending one of the other sessions, you can click on the Upskill link from our website, apeg.com. The second and third strategies I'll highlight address the importance of not leaving anyone behind. The second strategy is really a set of tactics that make it more likely that struggling low-income workers can succeed in employment. Collectively, those tactics are called the family economic success approach. The principal problem with our current approach to making low-income workers, moving them into jobs, is that our approach is focused on the job and not on the things that get in the way of workers succeeding in employment. Generally, we place low-income workers in jobs in two ways. First, we provide the worker with access to a database of available jobs and expect them to find a job from that database. And second, when or if that doesn't work, we invest a minimal amount in training, often without regard to whether a job is actually available in the field for which the worker is being trained, and then we turn them loose again on the database of jobs. And that is essentially our workforce development approach in America. Aside from not being well targeted, this ignores the fact that most low-income workers have a host of barriers to accepting employment and succeeding in a job. There are dozens of these common barriers, but a few of the most common, and I'm sure you'll recognize them all, include lack of reliable transportation to get to a job. Why would we expect, in a place with no transportation, public transportation available, that a worker could accept and succeed in employment if they don't have a car that can reliably get them there? The second is lack of affordable childcare and emergency childcare services for when the childcare arrangements inevitably break down, so that parents can accept and keep a job and avoid the excess absenteeism that loses so many entering low-income workers their jobs. Absence of savings. In fact, our policies related to public assistance generally discourage the accumulation of savings. But that means that many of the low-income workers that we try to move into these jobs are one blown tire away from losing that job because they have no way of fixing it if that happens. And then wages for entry-level jobs that are so low that most low-income families take a financial hit when the parents enter the workforce. After paying taxes, transportation, and childcare, the family generally has less left to live on than they would if they relied exclusively on public benefits. Public benefits that phase out faster than income rises are another issue. In fact, generally, wages have to reach $15 to $20 an hour before the increase in wages offsets the loss in benefits for a low-income worker moving into the workforce. So it makes it very hard for the workers to get ahead and to maintain that commitment to being in the workforce when they see every step they take leaving them farther behind. And finally, office hours for most programs that assist new workers, which require them to take time off work. So as a result, the employment's imperiled by the time they take off work to access benefits to close the gap between wages and what they need to live on, they risk losing their job because they're gone during the prime business hours when they're needed in that workplace. If a worker experiences just one of the many barriers, it severely diminishes the likelihood they're going to be able to succeed in employment. If they face multiple barriers, it's very likely that a worker will never become a stable participant in our workforce. We have to fix this, and we can do it by working together and finding wraparound approaches. A regional or local family economic success program looks at all these barriers, finds ways to address them, coordinates the services for the work so the worker can accept and remain at work. Information about how this can work in a rural area can be found at rufus.org. That Rufus is short for rural, R-U, Family and Economic Success, FES. rufes.org. Great strategies there. It's something that we really need to work on in this region. My third and final strategy, which you'll find likely a bit provocative, relates to one of the major barriers that prevents many qualified workers from finding and retaining employment: the way we test for drugs, especially marijuana. If you talk to employers in this region, they will often say, there are lots of potentially qualified candidates in the pipeline, but not so many that can pass a drug test. Many of the drug tests that are commonly used for drugs other than alcohol, however, measure historical use of the drug, not current intoxication. This means they test as much or more for whether a worker is complying with broader cultural or moral norms as they do about whether the worker is intoxicated and therefore a danger to themselves or to others or to the employer in doing the work on a day-to-day basis. This may have been acceptable at a time when we had significantly more workers than jobs, But as the workforce supplies become more and more constrained, we've got to really rethink this issue. Testing for past exposure is especially true for marijuana use. Commonly used tests for marijuana have a look-back period of between 30 days and 6 months. And the most sensitive of these tests will detect whether or not someone was exposed to marijuana smoke secondhand. So marijuana legalization in various places around the country really compounds this problem, and we will see this issue in Ohio. As more and more workers see other states approving marijuana use, you will find, I think, less social constraints here for casual marijuana use, compounding the problem we have of so many people being rejected with drug tests that look back rather than looking at intoxication. I'm not here today as an advocate for marijuana legalization, and I am a very strong advocate for safe workplaces. We work on a day-to-day basis in our manufacturing extension side of our operation to help improve the safety in our manufacturing workplaces. But when testing for past exposure versus present intoxication significantly lowers the availability of qualified workers at a time when we have shortages, we need to rethink our policies and our practices. There's a whole new class of drug tests coming online that can measure current intoxication inexpensively versus past use. And if we're going to continue to meet our workforce needs in an era of worker scarcity, our society, our insurers, and our employers really have to change the rules that they go by and focus more on the question of intoxication and less on the moral issue of whether or not that worker may have used an illegal substance in the past. So, in summary, we're entering into a time in America where demographic trends are going to drive severe workforce shortages. It's a time when we'll have to re-examine the ways that we do many things that affect the availability of skilled workforce. The two principles I set out at the beginning are good metrics to apply to current programs and practices and to new proposals that address or affect our workforce. The first principle, we must focus on the most critical positions, skilled positions first, ensures that the resources that we have available will be targeted where they can do the most to support our economic prosperity. The second, we cannot afford to leave anyone behind, helps us expand our thinking, drives us to new creative ways to ensure that our society prospers, and minimizes the amount that each of us will spend in our personal tax dollars to support those without skills and opportunities to attain self-sufficiency.